right, so we are going to stick with the second reading today because it is actually very important. As a matter of fact, the second reading is extremely important because it basically summarizes why we're religious in the first place. Yes, the second reading is that big of a deal. And you're probably going to hear me say this sort of thing fairly frequently, as time goes on. This is probably one of the most important things I have to teach you. For the second reading, we heard the most famous part of the letter of James. Can faith save without works? Faith without works is dead. Show me your faith without works, and I'll show you my faith through my works. This is a very hotly contested area of Christianity. People have been arguing about this for centuries. Martin Luther hated this book of the Bible. He hated the reading we heard today in church, and he hated what he saw in the church at the time, which was basically people who were trying to buy their way into heaven. They were favoring works over faith. All right, so they were trying to earn their own salvation as if their works would ever be enough to cover the bill. And they wouldn't. That is not at all how that works. And so one of the main points of the Protestant Reformation, this is about 500 years ago, one of the main points is that we are saved by faith alone. We're saved by faith, not works. Now, I won't speak for Catholics 500 years ago, but I will tell you, as a priest today, Catholics and Lutherans are in complete agreement about this today. That is true. Catholics and Protestants agree. No one can get into heaven by their own power. Your works will not save you. Salvation involves faith behind those works. That is basic Christian doctrine, and that is held by all denominations with a reasonable and healthy faith. So, at this point, we've got to add something. To really understand what's going on, we have to add something. Because so far, we've been cooking with two ingredients, faith and works, but the recipe calls for three ingredients. We're not saved by our works, and technically, we're not saved by our faith. We're saved by grace. Grace, the word grace means gift. It is a gift from God. We are saved because God saves us. He chooses to save us. He chooses to involve himself in our lives. If God didn't love us, if he didn't care about us, then our faith would be worthless. Of course, our faith isn't worthless because God does love us. And it is the grace of God that ultimately saves. So here is how religion works. And I mean good religion, not a cult. Religion worth caring about, worth participating in. Here's how it works. It starts with God. It absolutely must begin with God, not with ourselves. It starts with God loving us with a love that is beyond anything we have ever known. That is true whether we do something about it or not. It is true whether we believe it or not. But if we believe it, if we let that sink into our heart that God really does love us, then faith is the result. Faith is our response to God loving us. You can think of it like this. Grace is God coming down to us, and faith is us going back up to God through gratitude, prayer, and trust. And then, if you have a faith that is grace-fueled, you should be inspired to do good works. Your faith should make you want to do something good in the name of Jesus. That means caring for the poor, feeding the hungry, telling the truth, and coming to Mass. All of those are works. they will not save you, but they're expressions of the salvation that is already at work within us all. That's what St. James was trying to say today, and that's what Martin Luther had a little trouble understanding in this reading. Faith without works is dead. It just means you can't have one without the other. If faith is alive in your heart, then it should be expressed through your works in some way, shape, or form. And that, frankly, is religion in a nutshell. It starts with God, it ends with good works, and faith is what makes it all possible. Now, it's worth mentioning that's only true for good religion. A cult, for failure of a better definition, a cult is something that does not produce good works, does not depend upon faith, and or does not involve the love of God in any way. That is a dangerous thing right there. And that means, if you think about it long and hard, that means that bad Catholicism is a cult. We Catholics, we display cult-like behavior when we don't do the right thing, when we don't put our faith above our worldly concerns, and when we in no way live out the love of God. That is a dangerous thing. That has the power to do a great deal of damage. But here's the good news. It never, ever has to be that way. Never. If we only remember why we're here in the first place and keep God properly focused, we will always be a force of good in the world, and we will be a shining beacon of light for a world that's more in need of that than it might think. All it takes is faith that God really is up there and that he actually does love us. That is a very beautiful thing, and it belongs to each and every one of us. I think it's kind of funny that I had this rolling around in my head. So I had a kind of an encounter with this last weekend. I had a wedding. This was my last thing at Cabrini, so I was in West Bend. Don't worry, you don't know anybody in the story. I went to West Bend. I had my wedding, and I always go to the reception whenever I can possibly make it. I go to the reception. So I went. I had a fine time, and I said, "All right, guys, I'm gonna go. It's about 9 o'clock. I've got to get to work tomorrow." I think it's funny, every time I'm at a wedding reception, I say I've got work in the morning. I always catch a few people that are surprised by that. Like, Father, don't worry about it, call in sick. No, thank you. No, don't need the Archbishop calling me for that. So I called it a night around 9 o'clock. And for those of you that have been to a wedding reception during good weather, you know very well that when you leave the wedding reception hall to your car, you have a gauntlet of smokers that you have to get through. And when you're the priest, it is very tricky to get to your car without people striking up a conversation. So I get there and all the smokers are out there, and one guy, my age, smoking a cigar goes, "Oh boy, here comes the priest." And I couldn't get past him without a conversation, and he mentioned to me that he was non-denominational, but he liked the wedding anyway, and I said, "Thank you." He said, "Yeah, I see both sides of it." And I'm like, "Okay, I get that." And then he said, "So, Father, have you seen The Nun yet?" And The Nun is it's a blockbuster Hollywood horror movie based in a Catholic convent of nuns. So I told him the truth. I said, "No, I haven't seen it yet." I didn't mention to him I have no intention of seeing it. I said, "No, I haven't seen it, but I saw the advertisement for it." No joke, he says, "Oh, Father, you gotta see it. It's perfectly in line with Catholicism." I wanted to respond as politely as possible. I would give myself a C- with, I want to say my reaction was, right. I could tell the guy was a bit drunk. I didn't want to debate with him. because I didn't believe it would achieve any good. I decided the wisest thing to do was to say, smile and nod and say, all right, thank you, and just not take the bait. So I didn't fight him on that or anything, and shook his hand and said, good night, thank you for enjoying the wedding. But I'll tell you now the problem with his argument. He saw Catholicism as a cult. In his mind, religion equals following rules, and the more rules, the better. And therefore, if you're Catholic, you'll like a lot of rules. That was his view of our faith. And it seems to me, now granted, I talked to the guy for like 3 minutes. I could have just misread him, but it struck me that he had no conception that what we do begins and ends with the love of Christ. That was in no way his understanding, and therefore, he didn't understand the first thing about us. And that is the kind of misinformation we have to fight today, all of us. Obviously, I get a little bit more of it because I've got the uniform, but this is all our fight. And it's just that miscommunication and misunderstanding, but we do right by God every time we prove those people wrong. Every time we prove that we're more than cogs in a legalistic machine. When we prove that we're men and women of good works and faith, then we win. We're men and women of good works and faith because we understand that we enjoy the grace of God that he gives to all who are willing to accept it through his Son, Jesus Christ.